Welcome to this episode of the Talent Forge, where together we are shaping workforce behaviors. My name's Jay Johnson, your host, and today I am excited to bring in a guest from Toronto, Ontario, Jeanne Foot. Jeanne is the CEO and owner of the Recovery Concierge, and today we're going to dig into a conversation about behavior changes related to things such as addiction or any of the other aspects of performance related to the workplace. Welcome to the show, Jen.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Excited to
Glad,
see what unfolds.
yeah, glad to have you and to have this conversation. Let me start by asking, and I ask all of our guests this, what got you into this space? And, how did you find yourself where you are today?
Well, I always say my work chose me, not the other way around, because I was resistant it for a period of time. I was in a corporate family business, and I found I had a lot of substance misuse from in the early 90s, from when I'm starting off a little bit wobbly here, but let's just frame this again. Basically, in by the time I hit my early 30s in 1993, I had a substance use disorder, but I also had a tremendous adversity with trauma, and that had been fully disclosed, but nobody knew what trauma was in the early 90s.
Right.
It's a very trendy word now. You can
Yep.
hear nervous system regulation, trauma, all the things, and nobody absolutely knew what to do with it. So it looked like substance use treatment was my way of moving forward. So I did everything willingly, and I had a very young family. My life looked picture perfect on the outside. And then 7 years later, I was sober. I was doing everything I was supposed to do. And then I really felt like my life was no better, other than the fact that I was
Mm.
sober. I had no tools, no skills. I had no diagnosis, not that I necessarily needed one. I had no medication. And I was really, as the term is, white knuckling it. And then what happened to me, I had this epiphany like, if this is what life's going to be like, I don't want any part of it. And with that, I sent myself on a quest to figure out how do we get well from
Mm.
substance misuse. And the first thing I found was Kundalini Yoga, funny enough. I don't know if any of you know of it, but it's a very potent, they call it technology. It's a very potent technology. And that was the impetus for me finding many different things. And then I resisted to want to become a substance use counselor. Everybody does when they're in recovery. And I thought, that's so cliche. I don't need that. I have a business. I'm not doing this. And after I think about 5, 6, 7 years, I resisted it and I just surrendered, and I actually became a counselor and a coach. But my quest for knowledge, my thirst for knowledge was relentless. It just didn't stop because there were so many systemic issues, excuse me, systemic issues in the system that I was seeing that really didn't provide a solution for people. In fact, they exasperated it. And that was the original idea behind the Recovery Concierge. Basically, Recovery Concierge was innovated out of what wasn't there. And so from there, we started a bespoke concierge services that really meets clients wherever they're at in their journey. It can help support through transitions from intervention to alcohol monitoring to coaching to now not just finding resilience. We want to find people to absolutely thrive and, go all the way to be the very best person they can be. Because if we don't redesign their life in a way that's meaningful for people, they're just always going to be competing to go back.
What a powerful journey. And I want to say thank you for sharing that and sharing that with the audience. I think it's so important, as we sort of have conversations about behavioral health. Now, I am not a behavioral health clinician, I will say that. I play one on TV every now and then, but not so much in the real world. So I'm going to lean into you on a number of these different aspects, but I did just want to acknowledge and say thank you for sharing that journey. And I think that that definitely does. When you said it's kind of cliche that everybody in recovery goes, I've worked with a number of different recovery organizations, and whether it's a recovery coach or anything else, it is. But I think that when you've walked a walk, it does give you some unique insight in being able to support somebody else in taking the first step. So, kudos to you and kudos to what you've started to build with, or what you have built with the Recovery Concierge, because that's incredible.
Thank you.
So, yeah, let me. let me ask a question, and please share what you feel comfortable with. But what was it that sort of, because I found it really interesting what you said about, hey, when you decided to make the shift out of substance use disorder into sobriety, but still found yourself not feeling satisfied or not feeling. So my question is, and in some of the work that I've done is, there's a lot of people out there that, maybe want to make that transition or have found themselves in a position where that nagging thought in the back of their head, but they've not been able to do it. Was there something that sort of was the impetus that shifted your behavior to say, okay, enough's enough. This is where I want to go. If you're comfortable sharing that, if not, that's okay too.
Absolutely.
Just curious.
So first of all, I think we need to look at substance misuse like any condition. It has spectrum.
Mhm.
I really believe that. So like addiction is not addiction. It means it comes just like cancer is. It comes in many different shapes, many different flavors, many different stories, and it really has their spectrum on what someone may be subjected to. So I just want to say, because we kind of blanket that everybody an addict, which I hate the term, is someone who's going to die if they go back and use. And that's not always the case. That is a possibility. Don't get me wrong, I'm not minimizing it, but it's not always the case. So there's spectrum on the condition. For me, being sober and not having any skills, because my skill was to use because I then would feel
Mhm.
better, which is why a lot of people drink. There's no judgment here about what people do and don't do. Everybody finds their way. But a lot of people drink to feel for social anxiety. They want to take the edge off. They want to feel a little bit more comfortable in a room full of strangers. But what if someone can actually find those skills innately within themselves and not have to rely on anything external to sort of socially lubricate, for want of a better term,
Mhm.
to navigate a room full of strangers, to try new activities and just adventures, for want of a better word. I think those things are important. So for me, I didn't have the tools, but when I really thought that life's not worth living, I thought I better get a damn good life, otherwise I'm going back. I know that much about me. And it wasn't that my substance use was terrible. It wasn't. I wasn't going to die from it. I could put the brakes on difficultly with challenge, but it was for me. It was like I was just a polysubstance use, which means you put me in a room full of, white powder, and I could be there. You put me in a room where someone's smoking a joint, I could be there. But it was all I wanted to do because I didn't have any other tools.
Mhm. Yeah. So, and I've never heard that polysubstance. And again, I'm not in the clinical space, but I find that to be really interesting too, is that when you said the word addiction, and I know that that's not a great, it's not a word that, a label that I think anybody would want to wear, but when I think about it, it isn't just drugs or alcohol. It could be an addiction to something. It could be an addiction to a particular set of patterns of behaviors of withdrawal, or it could be an addiction to something in the nature of, hey, I'm addicted to food or a different part, something that's not going to kill
Technology
you.
right now is the main addiction, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's built in for us to multiple times a day pick up our phones.
Yep.
And so we have to consciously be mindful to not do that. So, some addictions, quote unquote, are more respectable than in others, such as work, right?
Hmm.
It's a
Yep.
practical tool. I have to make money. I'm starting a new business, all of the things, right? But at the end of the day, it still may take us away from things that are important for us.
Yeah, and when we think about addiction, going into some of the neurobiological aspects of it, what it is it's the trigger of cue craving reward and a dopaminergic response. And
Correct.
when we are in a state of anxiety or a state of threat or anything else, typically the brain is going to look for something that's going to bring that sense of comfort. That can be adaptive and or maladaptive in some different aspects. So, without speaking on the clinical side, from the behavioral side, I do understand those frames. So, help me understand, and I think that this would be really interesting. And again, thank you for digging into that vulnerably. But where maybe my question is on the when I hear most people say, "Hey, I've overcome a substance, whatever that is, whether that's alcohol, whether that's technology, whether that's drugs, or any of those pieces." most oftentimes they're like, oh my gosh, my life is so much better. I feel great. And, all those things I've been able to leave in the past. But I found it super interesting and very unique that you said, hey, even after that, after all of those things, yeah, I was sober, but I didn't feel like life had purpose or fulfillment. What was that experience? And if you were reflecting back on that now, can you help us understand? Because I would be willing to bet that for everybody that I've heard, hey, life is so much better sober, that there's probably other people out there that have experienced that and said, okay, well, what else is there? So can you walk us through that just a little bit, Jen?
Absolutely. I think we have to understand is the more we understand how we operate and how we work and how our mind works and our preferences in life, the better we are at this, whatever we're doing in life, right? And so a lot of people don't really understand that our subconscious program is linked to our emotional brain and it's driving most of our behavior. So if I'm not aware of that, and at some point I became aware of that, then I can correct it. But if we're not aware of something, it's very hard to change, right? So we're trying to change the external world, our concrete physical behavior, and that's like lifting weights. It requires repetition, it requires some grit, and eventually you'll become fatigued. So on a bad day, none of these tools really work. And that's what was going on, right? For a lot of people. So we really need to get to the root driver of whatever's going on for someone. For me, that root driver was, many, many years as a young girl from 6 to 12 of trauma, abuse.
Mm, I'm sorry to hear that.
That was the real issue. And because I didn't know how to cope with that, because I hate myself so much, I, are you with me? Sorry, I
Yep.
saw this. Yeah. Because I didn't know how to cope, because I hated myself so much, I had to obliterate myself. I don't have to deal with myself. But once I recognize that that is the real driving force behind my behavior, then I can work with what are the things that we need to look at. So we need to look at, as you said, trigger, cue. Can we pause in between? Affect behavior. Can we, at the end of the day, like there's a lot of different things such as how do I learn to love myself? How can I have compassion for myself? I have great compassion, big heart for everybody else, but not for myself. How can I do that? So we have to learn to love in ourselves, because basically our imprinting from 0 to 7, which is really where the environment we grew up in, cultural influences, our family of origin influences, our biological, physiological influences, all of these things are going to dictate how we act out or not. So the more we understand of the environment, and just because it's always been this way doesn't mean that we have to keep it this way. Because a lot of people think they're doomed, right? Oh, if you knew what my life was like, or they believe that they can't change because, of course, their head is telling them that. But we can't really listen to ourselves, because there's no difference between truth or fiction. Whatever we're telling ourselves, we're going to believe. So we need to get down to the root drivers.
And thank you for sharing that, Jen. For the audience, if you did hear any disruption, I think we've got that fixed and moving forward. But I wanted to comment on this because I found it, as you were talking, it really kind of resonated with me. And I'll share something from my own personal story is I have a bit of neurodivergence that honestly in 2026 I've really been working through in a different capacity with some different therapy modalities and everything else, everything from um, you know, own personal study, but also working with an integrative health specialist. I don't have typical neuro emotional fluency. So if you were to divide it out and say how much of Jay's brain is left brain versus right brain, 100% of Jay's brain is generally left brain. So it's very cognitive, it's very logical, but I don't experience emotions the same way that other people do, which has for my entire life created the conditions of sort of like wearing a mask or trying to fit in or utilizing essentially different behaviors to help me overcome some of those things. That's actually what made me start studying behavioral science. So as I hear a little bit of this story and whatever the trauma is, because trauma can be external environmental factors that have happened to us, but they can also be, in many cases, some of those internal situations or creations, whether that's anxiety, that can be depression, that can be a number of things which can be externally stimulated or it can be internally stimulated. I find it interesting because I probably had a number of addictive patterns, which everything from being addicted to work, being like I get super fixated when, especially when there's a problem that I don't understand. It's just like, okay, I can spend 16 hours researching and studying that, and it almost becomes an obsessive compulsive addiction until I feel like I've overcome whatever that is or whatever that barrier is. That's how I lived my life for a very, very long time. And I would use that intellectualization as my addictive mask in many cases, rather than actually dealing with the internal side. So I'm learning new tools and somatic tools and a number of things to be able to sort of like get in touch a little bit better. I have found that that has improved my outlook. It's improved my relationships. It's improving sort of just my generalized wellness. When you have moved into this place of Recovery Concierge and the
Mhm.
business that you've started, can you share, obviously, without talking about people or anything, but what experience have you seen when people have made some of these shifts, like these behavioral shifts? I can tell you, even within the last 90 days, I'm certainly not the person I was 90 days ago. Um, and, it's been a 44-year journey for me. So the 90 days before that and the 90 days before that. But it feels to me like when we have the right tools, when we have the right to your point, you didn't have tools or you didn't have some of those different pieces. When I have found that I've gotten in touch with the right tools, whether that is meditation, whether that is sound baths, whether that is somatic interpretation of emotions, all of those tools are really adding value. What's your experience and how have you seen when somebody gets a hold of the right sets of tools to maybe help them navigate some of these challenges? What's that experience like?
Okay, two-part question. So thank you for that. So you're speaking my language, and not many people do speak my language, especially in addictions. Okay, because addiction is still, steeped in a lot of old methodology, 12-step recovery, nothing wrong with it, just saying it has its limitations. We have science now, we have more knowledge. We're into the 21st century. We need to start practicing 21st century healthcare and mental health care as well.
Agreed.
So I'm a bit of a lone ranger in terms of like everything you're saying. I believe that all roads lead to Rome. So when we're talking about our diet, for example, psychiatry is quick to give medications, which may be necessary. I'm not This is not a debate whether medication is necessary, but what is also necessary and vital is the fact that we're not talking about their diet. We're not talking about the effects of sugar. We're not talking about the effects of processed food. We're not talking about, what is it doing to our metabolic health. So all of these things can have an effect. So when I work, the way I work is, first of all, people come in here really thinking they're flawed, very similar to how I thought. I thought there's absolutely something wrong with me. I can't do anything right. I hated myself. I must be the biggest screw up that walked this planet. And I literally built myself self-esteem bit by bit by bit by doing next acts, by really trying everything that was conventionally asked of me and recognizing that it wasn't my answer. It really wasn't my answer. It didn't mean that there wasn't improvements, but it wasn't going to take me all the way. So for me, nervous system regulation, somatic experiencing, and why is these things so important? We have three brains. We have our heart brain, we have our gut brain, we have our mental brain. And we're not typically taking these things into consideration. So when a lot of psychotherapists or behavioral health specialists or coaches who are very veering into the mental health range, I think there's a very small delineation between scope of practice and who's in the right scope of practice, where really there's a lot of defense about guarding what has always worked up until now, which is talk therapy. With emotional trauma, talk therapy does not work. It has to be processed because the trauma is stuck in the body, which is what soma is, body.
Mhm.
So we have to be able to release it and process it. We're not trying to go back and a trip down memory lane and remember every single detail about that terrible effect. What we're trying to recognize is that those sensations can hijack us if we are triggered and cued in a certain environment. So we have to learn how to become comfortable with them so that we can release them so they no longer hijack our life.
Yep.
So what do people see? I just worked with 20, I'm getting ideal clients now, which I have to say is beautiful. I've worked with many different types of clients. I've worked with a lot of clients and their families, and their families really are quick fix my loved one. What they're not recognizing their part in it, and it's not that we're blaming them, but how they interact with them can be exasperating why things are not going well. So I try to look, okay, client wants something from family or her family, and the family wants something from their loved one. How can we bridge that and mediate together? So that's a lot of what I do with family care. With a female recently I just worked with, she had an eating disorder when she was very young at the age of 12. She had been to therapy for years off and on for substance. She knew she had a problem, which is the best client to work with because then they're highly motivated to do something about it. Mm-hmm. And she said to me, she goes, I'm ready. I said, okay. So I took her down, needing a client where they're at. So first of all, it's compassionate persistence, calling them out on their stuff, but also with a compassionate love, because I'm holding space for someone where they've never really been shown compassion in the way that they feel that they need. And to be seen, to be heard, to feel safe is an absolute essential ingredient of building trust and building safety so that they can then move to the next step. So this client just said after 8 months, I don't need you anymore. I've achieved everything I wanted to achieve. I'm happy. She may come back for a tune-up at one point, but what more? And I get those kind of emails or letters or people outgrow me, and that's the whole point. They should outgrow me because we've now resourced them to be able to do things for themselves because they're not living on an island and they don't want to be dependent on their therapists and coaches. You know, we hire coaches and therapists because we want to be the best version of ourselves, and there is a need to have someone fellow journey with us at times, but there's also a need. It's not a passive do to process, it's a do with process. So we have to resource people.
There's so much good stuff to unpack there. Let me comment on a few things for the audience. One of the things is you had mentioned the heart, gut, and brain, and our actual brain. And it's so fascinating because a long time, not all that long ago, people would have been like, what do you mean the heart doesn't think and the gut doesn't think? But actually, modern neuroscience is telling us that there are neurons in all three of those places, which is why,
40,000 neurons in your heart. There you
yeah,
go.
and these are the molecules of thinking, and they're connected to the brain and the gut brain axis and the vagus nerve and all of those different things that are super important. So, yes, we are getting a better understanding of all of those different aspects and not just, hey, talk therapy is going to work. When you had talked about, sort of the holistic, whether it's diet, whether it's sleeping, whether it's exercise, and we've been told, self-care is so important, but I will tell you this is I find that the tools that I have adopted and utilize are far more effective when I am actually getting my routine exercise in, when I'm getting 7 hours of sleep, when I'm getting, healthy, nourishing meals as opposed to, oh my gosh, I'm on the run this week and it's fast food central. And I try to stay away from fast food as much as possible, but it's, the life of a busy consultant. So I think it's so important that we think about this. But the last thing that I really want to zone in on, everyone has something, whether that's a capital T trauma, whether that's a lower T trauma, whatever that might be, whether that is an internal fissure or disconnect or dissonance that they're experiencing or anything else. And if we were to shape this, and Jen, here's where I want to ask you, if we're to shape this and thinking about workforce behaviors and thinking about those employees that are in the system or even us when we're walking into a space, outside of some of the talk therapy or even some of the self-care, what are some things that you recommend, maybe like some general practices that maybe you recommend to different clients that gives them that sort of ability to open up. You had mentioned awareness is a big aspect. I 1000% agree with that. I mean, if we're not aware that there is some level of, hey, this is maybe not sitting well, or maybe I'm having these experiences, there's really no way to address them. But let's assume that the audience listening here today is aware of some different things or anything else. How would you help them to get started? What would they do to maybe start listening a little bit more somatically, or maybe engage a little bit more in some mindset, meditation, or anything else? What would that look like?
Absolutely. I think you hit on something, and you said everybody has something. We have to first recognize that we're humans and we're messy. That's just the nature of being a human. And I think the more we normalize that, the better everybody else can be, because people hide behind the veneer of, look at me, I'm so fantastic, or having to prove themselves. And these external values are not really aligned with their internal values, which is really maybe to be a decent person or to be compassionate or have rewarding relationships or whatever that may be. So I think the more we recognize our own humility and our human journey, I think the better that is. So, you talked about resourcing people. I also believe that all behavior has purpose.
Hmm.
So if somebody's, feeling uneasy or they're feeling anxious, it may be because their subconscious, for want of a better expression, is trying to bring attention to something that may need attention. Maybe they're really compromising their integrity, for example, by saying yes when they need to say no, or vice versa. So I think we need to recognize that when we have these minor elements, whether it's physical pain or really a sensation in our body that's kind of alerting us, that's data. Doesn't mean there's anything wrong with that right away. There's nothing wrong with you. All information carry even. And so one of the things that we need to do is we need to recognize that when we're going to start making changes, whether we're tuning in or whether we're actually making changes, is that we need to be patient with it. We're not going to go to 0 to 100 really quickly.
Yeah.
We just gonna, it's like honing that skill. We need to get better at it. We need to get better at saying yes, better at saying no, better at tuning into ourselves so that we can mine that data. So I think that's a really important one. I think in the corporate workplace, I think humility needs to be, you want a really more of a flat organizational structure. There, by the grace of God, go I. Me and you are the same. We're the same. May have a different plot, different stories, different characters, but our journey is the same. It's a journey of evolution to our best self. And I think not everybody wants it, not everybody signs up for it, but there's a lot of people who may not have any awareness or understanding how to even be anything different.
Yeah.
So we have to have compassion for them rather than judgment.
I think that that is such an important component. And that compassion for other people and not judgment, in many cases, one of the things that I've seen is also extending that to ourselves. I was not compassionate about my neurodivergence, and I still struggle with that, if I'm to be perfectly honest with you. I get very frustrated, like, what is wrong with me? That's why I studied behavioral science, was to understand, so that way I could not feel like, wow, am I just somebody who lacks empathy? Actually, no, I do have empathy. It just shows up very, very differently. It shows up in a more somatic way than it does a cognitive way. So I never really had compassion for myself. Um, and I think that what you said there is so important, is recognizing to start, hey, they may be going through something. Let's have a little compassion. Let's find a way to empathize with them or connect with them and better understand them. Because going back to what you said, and I've learned this more in the last year than anywhere else, being seen, being understood, and feeling a sense of belonging is one of the most important thing for human beings. I've learned that in the context of business, and I've learned that more in the context of relationships, thanks to my partner even in the last 90 days. So I think that that's really, really important for those managers, leaders, HR people, coaches, is how are you helping people feel seen, heard, and valued? And how would you ever do that if you're not compassionate about the struggles or the challenges?
Or
So,
present, or
yeah,
present. We're
yeah,
we're in a distracted society. So
Yeah.
that could be a major impediment towards connection.
Jen, I think we could probably talk on this subject for hours and hours, but in the interest of maybe a part two here coming soon, uh, if the audience wanted to get in touch with you, if they wanted to learn more about the Recovery Concierge and what you do, how would they connect with you?
Absolutely. Thank you. So just info at the Recovery Concierge. And we're right now actually designing an integrated practitioner assessment for people to really figure out where they are and where they want to be and how to close the gap. So that will be coming soon by the time this airs.
I hope that you can share that link with us, and I'll be happy to put that into the show notes. Uh,
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, Jen, it's been a pleasure to talk to you because, we never really dip too far into the behavioral health side. Generally, I work with organizations and leaders and culture and everything else. But the reality is it's impossible to divide Jay the person from Jay the professional because we're all the same thing. And while we can compartmentalize different pieces, how I am feeling internally is going to affect how I show up in the workplace. And that's true for every employee, every leader, every person. So having this conversation with you honestly was really empowering. And just to hear some of these different pieces, I think is going to really resonate with the audience. So thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, keep up the great work and the things that you're doing, and we'll definitely stay in touch because there's so much more to ask you and so much more to dig in. But for this time, I want to thank the audience for tuning into this episode of The Talent Forge, and where together we are shaping workforce behaviors.